Good afternoon. Irit, Mayor, Ronit, thank you for having me here. As far as I know, I'm the only Pole here and the only representative of Poland, which makes me even more honored to speak today. After what we have heard from Professor Kozlowski, I'm devastated, and I don't really know if we should worry about the UN Human Rights Council if this endangers us in any level similar to this what's going on online. But still, perhaps it's relevant to see the whole in the big picture, because these are not only the online hatred going on, but also these deeply rooted and traditional forms of hatred still being present. Okay, so when I visited recently the association's webpage, I came across this news, and not looking at the date, just looking at the title, I thought, wow. I was very excited, thinking finally something has changed. The next moment, of course, I noticed the rest and the date. It was 1994. However, something has changed indeed, because 2 months ago, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief released a report entitled Combating Antisemitism to Eliminate Discrimination on Intolerance Based on Religion and Belief. So the report calls anti-Semitism a threat that is, I quote, toxic to democracy. It also states that anti-Semitic violence, discrimination, and hostility are serious obstacles to enjoyment of the religious rights, and that the anti-Semitism is rising all over the world. But what really makes the report unprecedented is the fact that it clearly and honestly identifies the main sources of anti-Semitism today, and namely, it says that there is a growing use of anti-Semitic tropes with white supremacists, etc., but also radical Islamist groups. There is an increase in left-wing anti-Semitism and the hostile actions against the government of Israel. But also it notes claims that the objectives, activities, and effects of the BDS movement are fundamentally anti-Semitic. And of course, these are obvious things for all of us gathered here who are engaged in the fight against anti-Semitism. But after decades-long denying of the real and falsifying the real nature of anti-Semitism at the UN, I think that this report should be perceived as a revolutionary step towards acknowledging the true nature of anti-Semitism, and also confronting uncomfortable truths and perhaps finding some solutions. But of course, as much as I'm impressed and happy about the release of this report, it does not guarantee a permanent change in the attitude of the UN and UN Human Rights Council in particular towards Israel and in general towards the phenomenon of anti-Semitism, nor does it compensate for the years-long instances of and examples of spreading hatred in the UN. And I was asked to speak today about the outright and hidden forms of anti-Semitism at the UN Human Rights Council, but let me start by saying that in the case of this UN body, you don't actually need to look for and to search for this subtle hidden forms of anti-Semitism, because its anti-Semitism is mostly very explicit, open, evident, aggressive, or even vulgar. But the very creation of the universal system of human rights protection within the UN is inseparably connected with the history of the World War and the Holocaust. And in 2004, during the first ever conference on anti-Semitism held in the UN, the then Secretary General Kofi Annan of the United Nations said, and I will quote, the name United Nations was coined to describe the alliance fighting to end the barbarous regime that our organization came into being when the world had just learned the full horror of the concentration and extermination camps. It's therefore rightly said that the United Nations emerged from the ashes of the Holocaust. And the human rights agenda that fails to address anti-Semitism denies its own history. Most importantly, though, the UN played a crucial role in the establishment of the State of Israel. But however, and soon after, The decades-long continuing history of one-sided, biased, hostile approach to Israel started, and the low point of it was, of course, the 1975 resolution of the General Assembly declaring Zionism a form of racial discrimination. And at that time, but also today, of course, defining a state and shaming and naming it as a racist state means, as a matter of principle, but also as a matter of international law, that its existence should be regarded illegal. And even though the resolution, the infamous resolution, was repealed in 1991, its spirit and consequences persist till today. And also, even though there were no formal boycotting steps on the basis of law taken against Israel, it should be explicitly stressed that the organization for years have been introducing the policy of de facto boycotting of Israel. And one of the most well-known example is the boycott and exclusion of Israel from the works of the Asian Pacific regional group, where it, according to this geographical division, rightfully belongs. Another pattern in the treatment of Israel at the UN is its stigmatization as the worst human rights violator, of course. In May 2016, the UK, France, Germany, and other EU states supported the UN World Health Organization resolution co-sponsored by Arab group of states and the Palestinian delegation that singled out Israel as the only violator of mental, physical, and environmental health. And UN Watch rightfully noted that out of 24 items on the meeting's agenda, only one item, item number 19, against Israel, focused on a specific and named only this specific country. And now about the UN Human Rights Council. So when the council was set up in 2006 to replace the UN Human Rights Commission, that was generally perceived, and rightfully so, as completely politicized and also paralyzed because of its politicization, there were expectations that something will change, and in particular something will change with regard to the treatment of Israel at this UN body. But very soon, of course, the council turned into yet another forum of hating Israel and of course, underestimating the true phenomenon of anti-Semitism. And just to give you a drastic example, at the meeting of the Council on June 8, 2010, the representative of Syria, of course, traditionally accused Israel of being a state built upon hatred, discrimination, etc. But she also said that Jewish children on school buses, when they go to school on their way, sing a song with the following lyrics, and I quote, "With my teeth I will rip your flesh, with my mouth I will suck your blood." So equally disturbing to the very fact that she said what she said was the reaction of the chair of the council, of the session of the council, who just simply thanked the Syrian delegation for their contribution to the discussion. The very same chair, some months later, actually stopped Israeli ambassador from continuing his speech directed at Iranian leaders and dealing with the issue of spreading a Holocaust denial by Iranians. So Israeli ambassador was harshly reminded by the very same chair that when he refers to the issues concerning human rights, he should do it with respect and dignity towards other states, was also a quote. So from the establishment of the council up until 2018, 80% of all resolutions condemning cases of human rights violations are directed against Israel, 80%. At the same time, such most serious gross violations of human rights, like widespread use of torture, persecution of minorities, killing political opponents, they remain unnoticed by the Council. In 2009, for example, in relation to Chad, China, Cuba, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Turkmenistan, and Zimbabwe, the Council did not take any single action. Another arena of a very specific attitude of the Council towards Israel is, of course, its particular bizarre policy towards the objectivity of experts elected and appointed as special rapporteurs, with Richard Falk being a well-known example here. He denies the Holocaust, he portrays or he spreads in his social media accounts the most anti-Semitic pictures, and he was elected to serve as a special rapporteur. But when the Council was established, there was also a very urgent need to introduce the new mechanism of checking and monitoring the way UN member states are actually dealing with human rights. And the new procedure and new instrument was introduced. It's called Universal Periodic Review. And it can be described as a periodical, comprehensive, and critical assessment of the observance of human rights in UN member states, of course, in the ideal world, because as it works, it doesn't resemble this, what I have just said at all. And of course, the whole procedure, the UPR, should be based on the same criteria applying to all of the states except of one state, only Israel, of course. And at the same time, this hostile attitude towards Israel seems to trigger lack of consideration for the true nature and true problem of anti-Semitism. And in particular, in cases of the states that implemented anti-Semitism as a kind of their official domestic and foreign policy. And for example, this problem was completely disregarded. So anti-Semitism was completely disregarded during the UPR of Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. But during the first two rounds of UPR, specific recommendations concerning anti-Semitism were directed only towards 5 states, namely Poland, France, Ukraine, Czech Republic, and Lithuania. As a I'm not claiming that there is no anti-Semitism in Poland, and by the way, I'm really grateful that I wasn't asked to speak about Poland today, because this is being more and more considered as what I'm saying about Polish anti-Semitism, a defamation of the good name of the state and nation, which I don't intend to do, but it's being perceived as such. So Poland was among those countries where, according to UN Human Rights Council, the anti-Semitism is one of the biggest problems, while in Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Syria, it doesn't exist, right? So Israel remains one of the top states which have received the highest number of recommendations, meaning that in the eyes of the world, it should be perceived as one of the worst human rights violators. And this is the good company that Israel belongs to. So only North Korea, right? North Korea, Cuba, and China received more recommendations concerning human rights record than Israel. And of course, Israel decided not to attend the next round of UPR, but when it still was there, and there was a UPR in 2013 of Israel, Israel received the recommendations coming from human rights protection champions, and I have here the selection of these recommendations. Of course, Israel received also recommendations from liberal democratic states that were more rightful, I would say, but this is just to show you how bankrupt and corrupt the whole system is. If these states, as I said, the champions of human rights protection, are recommending Israel to improve its behavior in this way. But this list should be also seen and taken in the context of the recommendations that these states, those harsh critiques of Israel, are recommending to each other. And some of them are really grotesque, or at least bizarre, where, for example, Oman recommends Iran to continue to support and empower women in public life. There is a nice recommendation, oh no, it's not listed here, but there, it's here, sorry. Recommendation of Russia for Iran to continue the work which has been started on the improvement of the conditions of detention in the penitentiary system. Well, if anyone is familiar with the Russian system and conditions in a Russian detention center, that it's problematic. But as I said, this selection is just to show that the process, the UPR in particular, fails. So some concluding remarks. Well, it's clear, of course, that occasionally Israel violates human rights, as every other state in the world sometimes does. And for every such violation, it should be held responsible. And there are proper legal instruments, both international and domestic law instruments, to assert such responsibility. However, the level of bias, hatred, and injustice faced by Israel at the UN and at the UN Human Rights Council in particular turn it in the eyes of the world into the worst human rights violator. The analysis of the treatment of Israel at the UN brings yet another highly disturbing conclusion for any legal scholar dealing with the whole system of universal human rights protection. Because, as I said, it became obvious that all these instruments that we tried to imply, so the Council, the UPR, they are just failing, and they are being taken over by the agenda that it marks itself and defines itself as pro-human rights, but actually has nothing to do with human rights. So it's crucial, I think, that the organizations such as our association are present at the UN Human Rights Council, that they take the floor and speak about the true nature of anti-Semitism, but it's also crucial for the governments that are truly concerned of human rights to name loudly and expressly the real human rights worst violators, and not to allow a campaign of anti-Semitic hatred, discrimination, and defamation being conducted against Israel under the auspices of the organization that emerged from the ashes of the Holocaust. Thank you.